Now, one of the things that Freud proposed, and it's an interesting idea, is that if you interfere with the activity of one of these systems, especially the more troublesome systems like sexual desire and aggression, and those are troublesome because in some sense they're the most social of emotions, right? Because generally speaking, at least sometimes you need a partner for sexual activity, although that seems to be less frequent than it used to be in the past. And and anger is something that also is very socially disruptive. And so one of Freud's claims was it's particularly difficult for individuals to integrate sexual desire and aggression into their personality and into the social world, because those emotions are either socially disruptive or require a tremendous degree of cooperation from someone else. And that was sexuality, that was especially true before there was reliable birth control, and also when there was a lot more stigma associated with sex outside of marriage and also with childbirth outside of marriage. So, I don't, in my clinical practice, for example, now I don't see that many people who have the sort of sexual repression problems that Freud found so common among his Victorian clients. I mean, in our culture, it's more likely that people are having a terrible battle with the demons of hunger, and they have some sort of eating disorder because they're starving themselves and then binging, and starving themselves and then binging, or eating some god-awful combination of pure carbohydrates and sugars on a sort of a random basis, and so they dysregulate their hypothalamic systems because the hypothalamus controls hunger, and then they get into a vicious battle with it, and you don't win against your hypothalamus because mostly, as far as it's concerned, you're just an appendage to it. So, and it's much more powerful than you are, as you'll find out if you ever have a scrap with it. So, people who have eating disorders, they gorge and binge completely against their will, and they don't seem to be able to control it, and that's because your hypothalamus won't let you starve. It's not into that sort of thing. And so, no matter how thin you want to be, it would rather that you were alive. And it's more powerful. It has the capacity to exert more control over your behavior than you do, generally speaking. And the same thing often happens to people who develop addictions. And the addictions, an addictive substance in some sense harnesses a fundamental motivational system. And if you train that motivational system over a long enough period of time to successfully seek out the addictive substance, and you train it and reward it by using the addictive substance when you are able to, come across it, you'll create this little biological monster in your brain that you turn on at the drop of a hat and that you have very little control over when it's activated. So, and you see, one of the things that happens when people go into rehab for drug addiction is that it's pretty easy to get them through the withdrawal phase, even if it's something like heroin. And heroin withdrawal, although people are always, writing movies about how awful it is, it's about as bad as a bad case of the flu. And people, very seldom die during heroin withdrawal. They die during alcohol withdrawal all the time. But so you can get someone through withdrawal, but as soon as you put them back in their natural environment where their friends are and the cues that are associated with the addiction are still in place, they start taking the drug right away again, regardless of all their good intentions. And you can see that as well in your own behavior, because I doubt if a day passes where you don't do something that you swore you wouldn't do, and you do it and then you think, why did I do that? It's like, well, what do you mean I? Precisely. And that's the fundamental psychoanalytic question. Because I, even the way the word looks, it's one letter, it's like a one, I. It's like, well, is there an I there? Well, not really. What there is, generally speaking, is a loose aggregation of systems that are more or less going in the same direction that's diluted into thinking that there's a unity. And that's a prime psychoanalytic theory. And that part of the reason that people suffer is because those systems, first of all, don't necessarily have your well-being in mind, your pleasure, your freedom from anxiety, your freedom from pain. Like the system that mediates individual reproduction, the sexual system, it doesn't really care about you, so to speak. It cares about whether or not you reproduce. And one of the things you might think about, if you think, why is there so much conflict in human intimate relationships? It's because the demands of sexual reproduction and the demands of individual happiness are not the same thing. And you have to try to integrate both of them, but there's no reason that you would necessarily find the partner who would make your life most fulfilling also the one that you're sexually attracted to. You know, you'd hope that would be the case, but like, good luck with that. You'll end up with some jerk you can't stand because, you know, you get so hot you can't stand it when you're anywhere near them. So, and you know, you might think, well, wouldn't it be nice if you could bring that under voluntary control? It's like, well, good luck with that. So, you know, so these are the sorts of things that you need to think about when you're thinking about what the psychoanalytic thinkers were thinking about as the unconscious. So, in some sense, the unconscious is the ideational and motivational activities of all these underlying biological subsystems that make up your being, that make up the substrata of your psyche. You know, like, you tend to think of yourself as I, so that would be the Freudian ego, you know, as the part of you that subjectively experiences, and maybe also the part of you that has continuity of memory across time. And for one reason or another, we tend to experience that as something of a unity. It's not obvious why exactly. I think part of it is that we can separate ourselves out as a unit from the rest of the world, including other people, you know, and we're aware of our boundaries physically and also temporally. But I also think it's because, for one reason or another, we only seem to be able to do one thing at a time. And so the limitation, which is like a motor output limitation, seems also to imply to us that there's only one thing there. But, you know, it's not that unreasonable to think about ourselves as something more like an anthill than as something that's, you know, a completely unitary structure. Because obviously our physical structure is far from homogeneous, right? You're made up of all sorts of different subparts and they're qualitatively different. So